Tonight, free press.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump.
Donald Trump. Donald Trump.
The media mentions Trump 10 times every hour, Joe Biden just once. Can Biden afford 8 weeks of Trump dominating the airwaves? Hold your fire.
We're not looking for a war with Iran. We're not looking to broaden and deepen this conflict in the region.
Can the Biden administration keep Israel from hitting back at Iran?
Hands off Iran! Hands off Iran! Hands off Iran!
Are protesters on American streets now driving U.S. foreign policy? And why Israel might get the last laugh. God's misfits.
The way I understand it is they got God behind them and they make their own laws.
4 members of an anti-government religious group were tied to the gruesome murder of 2 moms. New details on the ambush in Oklahoma, the previous plans to kill, and the rest of the group still on the run. And do as I say, not as I do. NPR suspends the editor who exposed their liberal bias. What happened to free speech? Welcome to the fairest show on television. First tonight, it is the Trump show. As he told Playboy magazine, it's sold out everywhere. Live pictures of New York City right now. President Trump just wrapped up a visit. You can see it in the lower part of your screen. I think he's talking. Let's see if we can listen in. Oh, sorry, this is tape.
A very exciting time for me because the bodegas, the association invited me, and I respect them and they respect me. They want law and order. They have a lot of crime, tremendous crime, where their stores are being robbed. And as you know, we're going to give New York a very good shot for the presidency. We think we should be able to do it. A lot of things have changed. Lee Zeldin did a beautiful job. He ran, he lost by a little bit. And New York's a lot different. And we'll work with the mayor, and we'll work with the governor, and we'll bring in a lot of federal money to straighten out New York. And that includes crime. And these guys are great people, great friends.
All right, so that was President Trump. He visited a bodega that had been robbed and was in the news. We'll get to that in a second. Just after his hush money trial wrapped up for the day. That video was from moments ago. There have been big developments coming out of court a few miles from where you're seeing those pictures here in Washington, D.C. The president got a huge gift from the U.S. Supreme Court. We'll get to that a little later in the show. Trump, ever the showman, decided to make a stop after he left Manhattan court today. All right, so Trump dropped by the bodega where a worker stabbed and killed a would-be robber. You might remember that story and the surveillance video when it happened.
Come out, Papa. What's up with you? I don't want a problem, Papa. What's wrong with you? I know that's a little girl.
All right, Alvin Bragg charged the clerk who defended himself. An uproar in New York finally brought Bragg to his senses. Alvin Bragg being the exact same Alvin Bragg who is charging Donald Trump.
Alvin Bragg does nothing. He goes after guys like Trump who did nothing wrong. Violent criminals, murderers. They know there are hundreds of murderers all over the city. They know who they are. They don't pick them up. They go after Trump.
All right, we said it is the Trump show. Now for the supporting cast in this latest episode that is playing out in a Manhattan courtroom. 7 jurors were seated today, 3 men and 3 women. They work in various fields, including nursing, sales, education. A number of potential jurors have been excused for bias, including this man who spoke to NewsNation.
I think there is definitely some unconscious bias. All my friends growing up are Republican. I went to a Republican university that's slant Republican, so it just didn't feel fair to be in a jury like this.
An honest man at that. The media circus has largely died down outside of the courtroom. Reporters outnumber everybody, obviously. But the media coverage hasn't. In fact, between CNN, Fox, and MSNBC, Trump's name came up 238 times today. That's about 10 times per hour. On the other hand, President Biden was mentioned just 31 times. So the trials are generating a ton of free press for the former president. And the trials, as we just saw, let Donald Trump do what he does the very best, play the victim, Prosecutors are floating the idea of throwing Trump in jail for 30 days if he violates a gag order. Perhaps that's what Donald Trump wants. Today, his lawyer said the judge would turn Trump into Nelson Mandela, never one for hyperbole, by sending him to jail. Trump, of course, is undeterred.
We have a Trump-hating judge. We have a judge who shouldn't be on this case. He's totally conflicted. But this is a trial that should never happen. It should have been thrown out a long time ago.
George Wills here, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for The Washington Post, NewsNation senior political contributor. George, good to see you. You're smiling. I know you don't like Donald Trump, fair enough. But was he wrong in what he just said there?
Everything about these prosecutions is designed to make Mr. Trump look good. If the Supreme Court is going to consider whether or not the protesters that have been arrested by the government in connection with January 6th should be prosecuted under a law written, Sarbanes-Oxley, for the Enron economic dispute. Now we have the question here. You have Mr. Bragg trying to enforce a federal campaign finance law that was a misdemeanor on which the statute of limitations had run out until he tried to connect it with the crime of campaign finance violations. It's an astonishing exercise, not just here, but in the other cases of stretching the law.
You think about as Donald Trump is going about this, right? And he is a master showman, as you pointed out. He shows up at the bodega where the guy stabbed the robber, and now he's holding his press conference. You could hear the chants on and on and on and on. Meantime, President Biden is responding to Trump's allegations that his Justice Department is behind a lot of this. Today, Mr. Biden gave an interview to our Nexstar partners in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Take a listen.
His lack of ethics has nothing to do with me. I have not once talked to anyone in my administration about Trump's legal problems. A lot of them occurred well before I became president, and so I have nothing to do with that.
I'm wondering if when he says, you know, that I have nothing to do with that, his ethics have nothing to do with me, you know, he's beneath so many Americans, if that doesn't do more harm than good for Mr. Biden.
It is an odd attempt to distance himself from his administration. Article 2 of the Constitution is very spare about what the presidential duties are. They are to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. These are laws that are being executed against Mr. Trump. As you suggested a moment ago, I'm not a fan of Mr. Trump's, but I'm even bigger fan of the rule of law. And this has the smell of selective prosecution top to bottom.
Now we get to who the jury is, right? Picking a fair jury in New York for Donald Trump would be difficult. 7 people so far. One juror posted a video on social media showing people honking their horns, celebrating President Biden's victory in the 2020 election. Judge Juan Merchan, who reasonable people can agree is a very ardent Democrat, his daughter's a Democratic activist, said the woman gave, quote, reasonable explanations for the videos and insisted she could be impartial. Again, if you wanted to design a situation for Donald Trump to exploit it for his own political ends, could you come up with a better one?
No. I mean, when this all started, Leland, the question was, how can Donald Trump possibly campaign for president when he's in court all the time? The answer is constantly, incessantly. All the cameras in the country, it seems to me, are pointed to him, and Mr. Biden is a bystander.
This is something that we are going to now see an awful lot of over the next 6 months, which is the map that is on our wall, the race to 270, which in and of itself is all that matters, right? 270 electoral votes after the November election. And we have it set up of what will be the 7 swing states: Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. How much of Trump's play for victimhood matters, and in what states does it matter the most?
It only matters, if it matters anywhere, it matters in those 7 states. Leland, 36 states and the District of Columbia have voted the same way in all 6 elections in this century. So the battlefield is really narrow, and the stakes are very small margins of difference in all of these.
The small margins of differences are going to come in a couple of different groups. The New York Times pointed out that among African Americans and among Latinos is where we are seeing the biggest move. So if we take Nevada and we go ahead and give that to Joe Biden, we leave Arizona in play, large Hispanic population, leave Georgia in play, leave North Carolina in play. We'll split up Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, for example. So let's give Wisconsin to President Biden. We'll give Michigan to President Trump. Nobody is at 270 yet. Georgia, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, the African-American vote, significantly there. We have had people on this program who say that the prosecutions of Donald Trump, especially among African-American men, help him.
I shouldn't be surprised. They have an adversarial relationship, in many cases, to the criminal justice system. They just don't think it's fair. The recent death of O.J. Simpson reminding us of how the O.J. Simpson trial really highlighted for a number of Americans the suspicion of the criminal justice system.
All right, and with that, I have given Arizona to Joe Biden, just for lack of a better reason than Kari Lake seems to be having her own issues out there. That leaves Georgia, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. The African-American vote significantly plays in all three of those states. President Biden was in Scranton again today. If President Biden can simply talk for the next 6 months about middle-class issues and Donald Trump is still on trial, does the fact that Trump is complaining and Biden is at least talking about an issue matter?
Depends on the issue. It seems to me their idea of how to talk about the issues is talk about one issue, and that's abortion, over and over again. And Pennsylvania is the heart of the matter, Leland. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln said, I want to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky. Joe Biden cannot conceivably get to 270 electoral votes without Pennsylvania.
And we have now filled in the map, leaving it to be Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania. Mr. Will, good to see you as always, sir. Thank you. As Israel prepares for a counterattack and the U.S. prepares new sanctions, some have started asking if Iran's attack on Israel has given Benjamin Netanyahu a lifeline. Ambassador John Bolton on exactly how Israel proves it does not take orders from Washington, D.C. And the University of Southern California won't let a valedictorian speech act as a Trojan horse for a pro-Palestinian protest. How USC, well, lost both the right thing and the moral thing when we come back. .2:20 in the morning in Jerusalem, all quiet in the Middle East, at least right now. A counterattack by Israel is imminent. You think it would happen in the middle of the night. It could come as soon as tonight, i.e. tomorrow morning in the Middle East after Iran's barrage of airstrikes on Saturday. We have the map. When it happened on Saturday, the drones and missiles were headed this way. If there is Israeli counterstrikes on Iran itself, it would be coming this way, 1,200 plus miles from the Israeli bases here into Iran. And there's some questions, right? Would the Israelis go over Jordan and Saudi Arabia and be granted overfly rights? Would they go over Iraq? What to do about the air defenses as they head in to Iran? Big part of the question here is how much of whatever Israel is going to do is to prove to Iran that Israel does not take orders from Joe Biden. For that, we bring in former UN ambassador, former national security advisor, John Bolton. For as much as the Biden administration does not want a strike by Israel, they certainly have a weird way of going about it, which is to effectively dare Israel to prove to the world that they don't take orders from Joe Biden.
Yeah. Look, it's reprehensible that the Biden administration would not support a retaliatory strike. And today they've been leaking all these indications that it'll be a very limited strike and so on. They're trying to psychologically get the Israelis not to do what, in fact, they need to do. I don't have any inside information what Israel's response is going to be, but it should come soon. As you say, it might be tonight. I don't think so. Probably tomorrow or the next day. They shouldn't wait as long as Iran did after the attack on Quds Force leaders in Damascus on April the 1st. So it's coming soon. We don't know what it is, I think it ought to be a lot heavier than the administration wants to prove not just to Iran, but to Arab states in the region that think the United States under Joe Biden is weak and feckless, that Israel is their strong ally. I mean, you got to look ahead here after this is over. They want the Gulf Arab states on their side. The Gulf Arab states want to be on their side. And one way to prove that Israel is reliable, even if Joe Biden and the Americans under him are not, is to have a very strong response here.
Interesting note, just this coming out from Barak Ravid at Axios. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the U.S. will impose new sanctions targeting Iran, its missile and drone programs, and new sanctions against entities supporting the Islamic Revolutionary Guard and Defense Ministry. I guess the question would be, why weren't those already in place after October 7th?
Yeah. Listen, every time in my service in government we've imposed sanctions on a country, we always find out there are more sanctions you could impose. The way you do sanctions is massively, strictly enforced, no exceptions, to bring the adversary's economy to its knees. The Biden administration loosened up on the sanctions imposed after we got out of the nuclear deal. Iran's sales of oil internationally, and particularly to China, are back at the levels they were after the nuclear deal was in effect. I mean, it's the Biden administration that's allowed Iran over the past 3 years to earn the revenues that are now being spent on Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the Shia militia groups in Iraq and Syria, on the ballistic missile programs and drone programs that struck Israel last night, on the Iran nuclear program. We should try to, the objective should be to bring Iran's economy to its knees.
Look, and to be fair, I know you had your own disagreements with Donald Trump, but he effectively did that, or at least brought the Iranian economy to the point that funding terror all around the world was more difficult. Here's just some of the comments from the former president when he was president.
One of the greatest security threats facing peace-loving nations today is the repressive regime in Iran. Our policy is based on a clear-eyed assessment of the Iranian dictatorship, its sponsorship of terrorism, and its continuing aggression in the Middle East. When I look at the Iran deal and how bad a deal it is for us, it's a one-sided transaction where we're giving back $150 billion to a terrorist state.
If Joe Biden talked like that, and the Israelis felt supported as they did during the Trump administration, wouldn't that be the way to get them to either not respond or respond in a way that could sort of end the back and forth blows?
Listen, I think it's a significant contributing factor to Iran's decision to launch at least 320 drones and missiles at Israel that the Biden administration had been undercutting the Israeli government for weeks beforehand, trying to show division, trying to placate the left wing of the Democratic Party here at home. The way to deter Iran, at least to deter this regime in Iran, is to show solidarity with Israel, to agree that it has a right and really an obligation to its own citizens to respond to the Saturday night attack. The way you show a common front to an adversary like Iran is by being with your ally, not constantly carping at it and criticizing it.
Well said. Mr. Ambassador, it is good to see you. Obviously, we're going to keep watching and listening to see what happens over the next few hours before sunrise in Tehran. Ambassador Bolton, good to see you as always. Thank you, sir. Coming up next, NPR suspends an editor who dared speak about the newsroom's liberal bias, but has circled the wagons around a new CEO whose own tweets are, all things considered, much worse. So what does free speech mean? What does free speech mean on National Public Radio?
You've been told, I think, that we are doing a documentary. We went across a good part of the country to places where you'd given speeches over the years to just talk with people about how their lives have changed.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm going to listen to this one.
That's great. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
National Public Radio just suspended the 25-year veteran editor who blew the whistle on the radio network's far-left bias. He wrote a long piece. We told you about it last week. about how NPR would turn a blind eye to stories like the COVID lab leak theory, the Hunter Biden laptop story, and focus its efforts solely to damage or topple Donald Trump. The man who wrote it, with some personal risk, you could certainly say, was Uri Berliner, worked here in D.C. He talked to Cuomo before he got suspended.
We were kind of nerdy and really like to dig into things and understand the complexity of things. That I think that's evolved over the years into a much narrower kind of niche thinking, a group think that's really clustered around a very selective progressive views that don't allow enough air.
NewsNation contributor, Mediaite founding editor Colby Hall is with us now. You know, I had a boss who once said that bias wasn't having an opinion, bias is excluding opinions, and I guess that's sort of what NPR has done twice now, right? They exclude the opinions of half of America, which is what Berliner laid out, and then they punish someone who worked there who offered a dissenting opinion.
Yeah, I think NPR made a big mistake here, and not for obvious reasons. Look, anyone that's paid attention to NPR over the last 10 years could tell that it's had a more doctrinaire progressive bent. I kind of stopped listening to it as a result, and I don't know the details of Uri Berliner's contract and what he can say and do, but one of NPR's sort of programming mission is one of tolerance and acceptance, right? They lament the divided nature of the political world that we're in, very often from a progressive point of view. The opportunity here was to not punish Uri Berliner for ostensibly whistleblowing, but, saying, okay, great, we heard that, and we accept different points of view, and we're going to have a conversation about this. That would be the most NPR thing to do, and instead, they were angry, and they looked to sort of punish him, which, almost already proved
his point, right?
Right.
Yeah,
right.
So it proves a point. I think about the free speech issue, right? And that sort of the idea of free speech is so important in a liberal democracy, and so important to protecting democracy as people being able to think about things. The NPR CEO, what is that deranged racist psychopath ranting about today? I truly don't understand one of her tweets. I mean, sure, looting is counterproductive. This is back in 2020. But it's hard to be mad about protests not prioritizing the private property of a system of oppression founded on treating people's ancestors as private property. On and on and on and on. And she's the CEO. Okay, so is it, and you make a good point about contracts going back and forth, and there's the legal side of things, and then there is the sort of moral and fair side of things. Is it fair to say free speech applies to the left when applied by the left, but it does not apply to the right, be it Donald Trump, who is often turned off on CNN and MSNBC, is often not covered completely unfairly on NPR?
Well, I think that you make a great point, and absolutely that's the case. I mean, I used to make fun of some of my super liberal friends here in Brownstone, Brooklyn, and they were claimed to be so open-minded, but they were so open-minded that they were closed-minded about it, in that they would shut off any open conversation. And I think Uri Berliner's point is that there's a lack of curiosity and openness to sort of, not in social anthropology about Trump fans, but looking at the broader picture instead of trying to advocate and tell its listeners what they should be thinking, which is precisely what their mission had been since Rodney King. And I think Uri Berliner was wise to point out. Yeah. So, I mean, it's advocacy journalism. And in many ways, NPR is sort of appealing to the same extreme side that we lament Fox News or MSNBC do. It's become advocacy, and the body politic is hurt for that.
National Progressive Radio, maybe, just to be fair in terms of a name.
Right now,
all right, Colby, good to see you. Thank you.
Thanks, Leland.
Speaking of silencing folks, this is an interesting story. You got to pay attention to this one. The University of Southern California disinvited its Muslim valedictorian from giving a graduation speech. Asna Tabassum liked anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist speeches and writings online and got exposed. Tabassum minors in resistance to genocide, whatever that means. It sounds like it has some kind of anti-Israel bend to it. She has a link on her Instagram account to, quote, learn about what's happening in Palestine and how to help. By that, she likely doesn't mean kicking out Hamas. But of course, Asna is now the victim from her statement. I am both shocked by this decision and profoundly disappointed that the university is succumbing to a campaign of hate meant to silence my voice. I'm not surprised by those who attempt to propagate hate. And there you go. Somehow, standing up to people who parrot terrorists is hatred. USC released a statement saying, in part, unfortunately, over the past several days, discussion relating to the selection of our valedictorian has taken on an alarming tenor. Now, I'm going to surprise you here. They should let her speak. Or they should say, we don't want a bigot to speak. Hiding behind it's not safe is cowardly. Then again, it's a big university, so par for the course. USC, of course, could pay to make it safe. They could pay for the security, but they won't. Nor will they tell the truth. And the truth is, the liberal intelligentsia there can't stomach telling a Jew-hating anti-Semite she can't speak because she parrots terrorist talking points. That's moral clarity. The rich donors won't tolerate a Jew-hating anti-Semite speaking, so they're caught between their intellectual pureness and who pays the bills. So the university hides. They're a bunch of cowards, kind of like terrorists. But there's a larger point here, just thinking about safety. Who threatens who? Somehow, in this upside-down world, even for USC, it's the Jews causing the problem. Hamas, militant Islam, were the ones who started a war on October 7th. They were the ones who butchered children in their sleep. Hamas, in the name of Allah, raped and brutalized innocent women across southern Israel. I could go on, of course. But somehow it's the Muslims in America who should be scared of the Jews. That's USC's logic. So let's be clear. Asa Tannenbaum's views about Jews don't really leave a lot of room for Jews to exist. Yet criticizing her is Islamic phobic. According to USC, criticizing her is hateful. It's violence in some way. For so long, we have been told that we need to name and shame bigots. Silence is violence. Jews know that. Silence by so many led to the Holocaust. Telling the Jews they were the problem led to the Holocaust too. And yet here is USC telling everyone that the Jews, the people who are complaining, the people who are sounding the alarm about a virulent anti-Semite, is the problem. No. The problem is someone who talks like a terrorist. They're not a victim. George W. Bush was right. Not just for this young woman who obviously did well in school. It's not about her. It's kind of about USC. You're either with us, as George W. Bush said, or you're with the terrorists. Donald Trump's best moment in court today didn't happen in New York. It was in a courthouse he's never had to step foot in. We'll explain the Supreme Court arguments that could give Donald Trump another win before November. Over the case of 350 charged in the January 6th riots. The rioters weren't charged with insurrection or overthrowing the government, but obstructing an official proceeding. The Department of Justice used a law from financial crimes to go after not only the Trump rioters, but it's also part of the charges against Donald Trump himself. Here's a particularly sharp question of the Department of Justice from Justice Clarence Thomas.
There have been many violent protests that have interfered with proceedings. Has the government applied this provision to other protests in the past?
Supreme Court will rule on the case in a few months. They could throw out many of the January 6th cases, some of the charges against Trump. Based on the arguments in court, reasonable people could agree it did not go well for the Biden Department of Justice. With us now, former chief counsel to the Senate Majority Leader, member of the Judiciary Committee, Congressman Glenn Ivey. It's good to see you, Congressman. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
I have a rule here. I never argue law with lawyers because I'm not one. I'll ask you it a different way. Is there a case against Donald Trump that Democrats could hang their hat on and say, hey, that's going really well?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the Jack Smith case is, once it gets to trial, I think he's going to have a big problem.
And this is the Jack Smith case in D.C.?
Yeah.
So even if the court throws out those charges against him?
There are other charges in the case, but, and even in the ones that came up today, I just thought, I listened to the oral arguments. To me, it sounded like there was a split. You had the liberal wing of the party, and then you had the conservative wing, and you had Justice Barrett in the middle. So I think we'll have to see how it goes. But it's a straightforward kind of how do you read the plain language of the statute otherwise and the language that comes after it. So we'll see where they go.
Are Democrats at all worried? We're watching video of Donald Trump today. He was at the bodega where that had been robbed, and Alvin Bragg charged the guy and then had to drop the charges. You think just sort of at all as cases are going against Donald Trump versus the election timeline, he seems to be racking up wins and things keep getting delayed, which keeps working well for Donald Trump. The polling shows that him playing the victim works well. Is there any discussion among Democratic circles of it might have been better to not bring the criminal cases and just try to beat Donald Trump on the issues?
I don't think that's how prosecutors should make the decision. In fact, I would be deeply disturbed if prosecutors were making a decision based on electoral calculations. And I don't think all the cases have gone all that well for Trump. You know, the New York Attorney General case that found the Trump enterprises guilty of fraud. I forget the number, $500 million.
I don't think it was guilty. I think it was responsible, but yes.
Liable. $500 million. And then the sexual assault case. Pretty astonishing stuff in my book.
Okay.
Now, here's the bottom line, though. From an electoral standpoint, Trump supporters aren't going to be moved by that one way or the other, apparently. I think Biden supporters certainly won't be turned off by, turn away from Biden because of these court cases. The question is going to be what's going to happen. They used to call them persuadables, but they call them double haters now because they are.
That's a new one. I like that term.
Yeah.
Double haters. Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Probably accurate. When I was in the Middle East, we used to say, I have two choices, both of which are bitter, was the Arabic saying. You made a good point, though, when you said that shouldn't be what prosecutors are deciding cases on. And we heard today for the first time Joe Biden respond, actually in an interview with our Next Star partners, about whether or not he was involved and whether or not in answering the charge from Donald Trump that it was President Biden prosecuting him, right? And I understand the arguments that the DOJ is separate and Jack Smith's separate and on and on and on. But the fact of the matter is the President of the United States is the head of the executive branch. That's just the way the Constitution works.
Sure.
With double haters, is President Biden going to be able to separate himself from the DOJ that, by definition, he is the executive of?
I'm not sure, but I think the facts on their face suggest that he definitely has been separate from that. I mean, the liberal attack on Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, is that he should have brought these cases 2 years ago. And there's a logic to that, because that really would have, if he'd gotten the convictions a year or two earlier, then would have totally derailed the Trump campaign. And then you've got the Department of Justice charging Senator Menendez and other Democrats, too. So.
It's gold bars in your house, I think, makes things a little different. Okay. Is Democrat, as you all are looking at this, we had George Will on earlier, we put the map to 270 up. We all talked about Pennsylvania, where it's coming down to. I have to think that there are a lot of Democrats, reasonable ones, who are wondering if the criminal cases do not take Donald Trump out, which so far they have not. So far we've seen his poll numbers go up every time. What is going to?
I really don't think the voters are going to decide the election based on these cases. That's just my gut. And frankly, I'd rather them not. My view is that we have to beat him at the ballot box. Trumpism is, in my view, a cancer on the country. And, the way he's approached things, especially every election you lose is a lie and sort of undermining rule of law and basic institutions. The only way to beat that back is to beat him at the polls and force the Republican Party to rethink their approach so that he's not the only voice they listen to. They move back towards, I didn't love Ronald Reagan, but, I miss the guy now.
It's amazing how Ronald Reagan all of a sudden Democrats love.
I tell you. I mean, because he was predictable, and there were things I disagreed about, but the Russia position, for example, he never would have done that. He
would not have.
Yeah.
I think we can agree on that. Hey, this was a great conversation. You're welcome back anytime. We've been trying to book you for a while. We're glad you came.
Happy to be here.
All right. Thank you, Congressman.
All right.
New details in an Oklahoma double murder case. How a grandmother and Republican county chair ended up leading a group called God's Misfits. Perhaps they aptly named themselves based on their pictures. All right, what they planned after the murders is worth talking about. We'll see in a minute. Back with breaking news on the two missing moms. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation announced the two bodies they found earlier this week were Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly. We'll put their pictures up in a second. A group called God's Misfits have been charged in the deaths of the two women who disappeared in Oklahoma. This is the Misfits mugshots. On the far right is Tiffany Adams. Tiffany Adams is not only the grandmother of the murdered woman's children, but she's also the former chair of the county's Republican Party. Adams accused of being one of the masterminds behind the murders, researching stun guns, purchasing burner phones, planning multiple murder scenarios. How does a seemingly normal woman become one of God's misfits and eventually murder the mother of her grandchildren? In an exclusive statement, Veronica Butler's attorney has told NewsNation this case highlights the conflict, stress, and magnitude of decisions that go into any child custody case. This case was contentious from the beginning. It became increasingly contentious as time went on. So unfortunate. I'm so deeply saddened by the loss of my client, Veronica. I know all she ever wanted was to love her children. NewsNation senior correspondent Brian Enton is in Liberal, Kansas, looking into this. God's Misfits is sort of one of the more catchy names in all of life, and the mugshots fit, Brian, as I'm sure you found out traveling through Kansas. Was this group formed for this purpose, or were these people who were sort of always a little out there and had some unusual views and were planning unusual things, and this just was how they got caught?
Well, a few interesting things. First of all, Leland, there are a lot of people in this area who are anti-government. I mean, I've been talking to people here for the last day, and that's not unusual. But the God's Misfits group is extreme. It does exist in this area. They have meetings on the Oklahoma-Texas line, and they believe that they only have to follow God's law. That's what I found out today. They don't believe that they have to adhere to the law of the land or the state laws. They only have to adhere to God's law, which could have something to do with why they thought they'd get away with this. By the way, when you were setting up who these folks are, I mean, you might not be able to tell from the pictures, but they are very powerful, influential people in this area, Leland. They own massive, massive amounts of land. They are involved in different kinds of businesses. Everyone knows them. Everyone that we've talked to, for the most part, feared them. And some people even did know that they were in this group, God's Misfits. I spoke to the municipal judge here, the judge, who was very good friends and a business partner with one of the suspects. Again, shows you how small town this is. Listen to what he told me, Leland.
The way I understand it is they got God behind them and they make their own laws. But now, again, that's hearsay. I never knew about them.
That's what you're hearing from other people in town.
That's what I'm hearing from other people, yeah. I'm still, I'll say it again, I'm blown away that this even happened. I just can't. Tad was a very good friend of mine. I'm not going to say was a very good friend of mine. He is a good friend of mine. But this just blew me away.
That's the judge, Leland. So
Brian,
that is the
why
judge,
are we doing
Leland,
an interview in
the
a
municipal
car?
judge here. Well, it's a good question. He was actually just passing by the judge. I'd met him at his house yesterday, and today he decided he did want to speak, so he just got in the car with me, which kind of made it quick and easy to do because he was on his way to lunch.
Okay.
But that judge, who happens to be friends and business partners with one of the suspects, Tad Cullum, the judge was at the suspect's house when the raid went down with the SWAT team. The judge had a shotgun put in his face and was there when the raid happened. So, I mean, it's like this whole story is just, it's so bizarre and crazy, Leland.
So, are these God's Misfits people, so there's more to this group than just these four, right? Are we to believe that they have other things planned, that there's other bad things they're willing to do if they're allegedly involved in murdering this person? Or was it sort of like they were God's Misfits during the day and at night they just decided to hatch this double murder scheme?
So this is my sense, Leland. The God's Misfits component to this, the religious cult, I think is separate from what caused the murder. The murder really does seem to have been caused of those two moms because of the custody battle. And I think it just came out through all of that they were in the God's Misfits group. And I do think that may have had something to do with the fact that they thought they would get away with this because at the end of the day, they believed they only had to adhere to as what they call God's laws.
And now they find there are other laws that will be enforced. Hey, Brian, you're out in Kansas right now. Brian is one of the most incredible reporters I've ever worked with, truthfully. And so great interview with the judge. Also, we got an interview a little bit earlier last week with the family of Riley Strain. That is the young man who disappeared in Nashville, ended up in a river. Dead. The family has got a lot of questions. We are not going to give it all away, though. Brian is going to be on Banfield tonight, 10/9 Central, with the NewsNation exclusive interview. What really happened to Riley Strange? His family's now talking for the first time. It's the interview that all the networks wanted, and with good reason, because of just how bizarre this story is, how many questions there are. Brian will be on Banfield tonight, 10/9 Central. Brian, great work as always. Thank you. Few thoughts from you before we go. Ellen writes in response to yesterday's war notes, no offense, Leland, but things are getting so bad, it's hard to watch you for a bit. Love your show. Agree with everything you report on, but I think I'm getting an ulcer. Ellen, Warren Buffett once said, nobody went broke betting on America. Better times are ahead. Maria, I love it when you have that gentleman on who tells us how someone is feeling or how they are saying by looking at them. It's insightful and fun. Body Talk, Greg Hartley will be back. He's a former Army interrogator. He may even analyze me. Bob wrote on Friday, I enjoy your insightful reporting and analysis on all subjects. I have been a fan of WGN for many years. I continue to be a fan of The Offspring, NewsNation. Thanks, Bob. We're grateful. WGN is a great legacy. Darla on Twitter, I just found it and recently decided to give NewsNation a try because I've always enjoyed Leland Vittert's reporting on Fox News. I happened upon it by accident and saw Leland, so I started watching. Darla, thank you. You are why we are the fastest growing cable network in America, because people like you. So do us a favor and please tell your friends. Tell your friends why you trust us, why you're willing to spend time with me and with Chris Cuomo every night. He is up next. I'll see you tomorrow at 4 o'clock on War Notes. That's when our newsletter comes out. warnotes.com to subscribe for free. Here's Chris.